The most important decision that you'll make in Throne Liberty is what class you play and what build you decide to pursue. Now, before I lose you, I want you to know that if you're brand new to Throne Liberty, you are going to want to hear what's in this video and the information I'm about to share, because it's extremely important when it comes to those two things: choosing your weapons, and more importantly, choosing your build. And my goal is to just get you to understand the system, because in Throne and Liberty, you are your build. This isn't like Lost Ark or BDO where, you play a striker or a warrior or berserker and everyone pretty much gears it the same way and plays it the same way, and it's just a matter of who can play each class better. In Throne and Liberty, regardless of what weapon class you use, you will eventually choose a build, and that build will define you. There is no single best build for all weapons. There isn't. Throne and Liberty is very much a rock, paper, scissors system, very much a pick your poison system. There are going to be things that you're strong to. There are going to be things that you're weak to. You have to give up something to gain something else. I'm going to try my best to give you an entry-level understanding to these systems so that when you get into the game, you'll have a better idea as to what you're trying to pursue with your gear. And this is going to apply to pretty much everything, because I assure you, when you start for the first time, right out the gate, you're going to have a lot of different options to choose from, and you will 100% ask, assuming you're new to the game, which one should I go for? Is this that good? Is that good? I don't know. I'm just going to pick a random one. And believe me when I say, especially when you start pushing that end game, you are going to want to have a build chosen, because it is very punishing, especially for free-to-play players, if you choose the wrong build. Also, keep in mind that content and progression is gated in this game. This isn't like BDO where you can just farm infinitely. So you will have a limited number of progression mats that you can even use. So whether or not you're a whale or free-to-play, it will be very costly, time-consuming for you to switch builds or to fix your build. Hopefully this video will prevent you from doing so. Now, before we begin, don't forget to like and subscribe, guys. I'm getting really close to 100K subs. Just hit that button. It's completely free, especially if you found this helpful. 100K has been a huge milestone of mine, and I would really, really appreciate your guys' support on this. Also, come follow me on Twitch. I'm streaming a lot of Throne pretty much every day to and through the launch of the game, and that's pretty much it. Let's get started. All right, guys, so we are going to be going over this site, and we're going to be using this site to help us, or help me to help you understand how this system works. So on this page, we have our stat points right here. Like I said, we're not going to go over all of these. These are my equipment pieces, and these are my attributes. Now, before we get into this, I want to pull up this little document right here. This is relative to these stats right here. You can see there's a lot of stats, but I'm just going to kind of break this down and go over some key stats so that you guys can better understand the system. And honestly, if you just understand these key stats, then you're off to a pretty good start, and you can learn the rest of the stuff later. Okay, so we have what's called crit and crit damage. That's pretty straightforward. Everyone knows what that is. But in addition to crit and crit damage, you have something called endurance and crit damage reduction. Obviously, crit damage reduction reduces crit damage. It is the counter to crit damage. If I have 10% crit damage and you have 10% crit damage reduction, those two offset, that's a net zero. Pretty straightforward, right? Endurance is essentially that for critical hits. Endurance will lower the amount of crit. Okay, it is the counter to crit. Then you have something called heavy attack. Heavy attack is in ×2 damage. Okay, some of you guys might be thinking, well, isn't that crit? Again, I'm not going to go into too many details, but yeah, pretty much. So if I hit you for 10K, heavy attack is going to hit you for 20K. So you can kind of think of it as a double crit in a way. Heavy attack evasion, as you may guess, is the counter to heavy attack. Next, we have hit and we have evasion. Same thing. Hit allows me to land skills on you, and evasion allows me to dodge your skills. And when I say dodge, I mean literally dodge everything. The CC doesn't go through, the damage doesn't go through, nothing goes through. It's like you completely whiff. Next, you have CC chance. Now, when it comes to the CCs, there's a lot of specific types of CCs, and they all act as their own individual stat. So stun is its own stat. Stun resist would be its own stat. Collision, which would be like a knockback or a float in the air. Collision also has a counter, which is collision resist. So there's a bunch of different types types of CCs, each one having their own resist that you can build for or against. Now down here, these are pretty much the rest of the significant stats that you have. You have your basic attack speed, range, shield block pen, and some of these obviously have counters, like shield block pen is the counter to block rate. Bonus damage, skill damage, then you've got skill damage resist. So you've got a lot of these other stats that are in the game, and some of these stats are more significant to certain weapons than others. But for the most part, again, forget about all this for a second. Just know, especially out the gate, crit, endurance, hit, evasion. These are pretty much the two big ones that you want to go for. Now, like I said in the beginning of the video, you cannot get everything. Now, before we actually showcase a few of these builds and how they kind of come together, I want to pull up this diagram right here. Sorry for the flashbang. Now, in Throne and Liberty, if I bring up this right here, you're going to know these stats right here. You're going to notice, for example, ranged evasion 1000. I have, with this build, I have 1227 ranged evasion. Well, what does that mean? I don't see a percentage there. Kanon, you're sharing percentages. I was sharing percentages because those numbers have percentages tied to them. Okay, so that's what this is. So if we take a look at this chart, if I have 100 of a stat, that gives me a 9% chance, whatever that may be. If I have 500, that gives me a 33% chance. So if I have 500 crit, that gives me a 33% chance to crit. If I have 500 endurance, then that is going to reduce the target's crit that hits me. So if you have 500 crit and I have 500 endurance, I essentially negate your 500 and you have 0 crit against me. That's how endurance works. And the same with hit and evasion. If you have 1500 evasion, which would be 60%, and I have 1000 hit, which is 500 less than you, that's a net difference of 500 evasion that you have on me. 500 evasion would be a 33% chance for you to land your attack, which means you're going to land 2 out of 3. You're going to miss 1 out of 3 of your attacks. Now, we talked about in the beginning of the video that you have to pick your poison. You can't have a god tier build. You're going to have to give up something, whether that's offense, whether that's defense to a specific type of attack, whatever that may be. You have to give up something and you have to build towards something. Now, let me show you how all of this kind of ties into actual builds. I've got my Greatsword Dagger build up here. Now, Greatsword Dagger is a class that is designed around 2 main principles. Number 1, primary rule number 1, assassinate single targets. Get in, blow them up, 1-shot them, 2-shot them, get out. Number 2, in the end game, if you have the gear for it, you can set up big AoE nukes, and you could also provide an AoE nuke depending on your group and your gear for your team. This is why Greatsword Dagger in particular has a lot more value at the end game in KR, in group scale PvP, and large scale PvP GVGs, and in the early game they're a little bit more smaller scale focused and not super amazing in large scale. Now, this is my main build on KR, and I've chosen the 10th Despair Blade right here. This is going to allow me to have an AoE puddle that explodes, that deals a lot of damage every time I CC a target. And then this blade, this dagger right here, allows me to go back into stealth every time I kill a target, assuming I kill the target within 5 seconds of coming out of stealth. This is the best combination right now in KR, or the strongest combination in KR right now. And of course, there are different variations of this build, but the build that I'm going for, if we look at the stats right here, I want you to notice I have 47% attack speed. I have 481 heavy attack chance. I have 1500, almost 1500 melee crit. By the way, I am going off of base sheet numbers. Some of these numbers change depending on the weapon that you have out, your masteries, your passives, but just to make it a little bit more digestible and easy to follow for you guys that are brand new, I'm just gonna go based off of what's written here, so I don't confuse you. Otherwise, I would actually go off of their real figures. For example, the real figure of the heavy attack chance is actually higher than this, but what's on paper is 481. And then I have 2100 hit right here, melee. I am a melee. And my defensives, I have 2600, almost 2600 melee evasion. I have 1200 range evasion, and I have 367 magic evasion. Now, even if you don't understand numbers or how significant these numbers are, like the scaling and the formula, it doesn't take a genius to recognize, okay, 2600, 1200, 367. What am I strong against? What am I weak against? I'm strong. I can defend against melee quite well. I'm going to evade a lot of their attacks. Ranged evasion, I'm pretty sturdy against range. And magic evasion, that is my weakness. That is my poison. I'm going to be weak towards poison. Now, why did I choose, or excuse me, I said poison, weak towards magic. I apologize. I'm weak towards magic. Now, why did I choose magic to be weak to? Well, there are a few different reasons. There's a reason when it comes to playstyle and the abilities that I use. But more importantly, this build that I'm using the Wraith set for this. If you look at the Wraith set, I have a 4-piece bonus that gives me an additional 240 heavy attack that is not reflected here, which means this gives me realistically over somewhere between 700 to 800 heavy attack, and that's before the buffs. And after the buffs, I will be around roughly 1,000 melee heavy attack chance, which is very significant because remember, a heavy attack chance gives me a chance to just double my damage, which is a massive nuke, which synergizes well with this playstyle. Now, the reason why I've chosen magic to be weak to is, well, if you look at the traits that are available for this type of armor set, I can take melee evasion, ranged evasion, melee endurance, ranged endurance. I could also take obviously health and debuff duration. We're not going to really talk about those. HP kind of goes out without saying, but you're not going to see any magic traits on this piece of gear. If you're a range, if you're a bow class and you're going for an armor set that pushes you towards damage, range damage with your bow, those stats or those sets, the leather sets, you're going to notice don't have any melee defensive. You're going to have options for ranged and magic in leather. So what would a bow user be weak to? Typically, they would be weak to melee. You see where this rock, paper, scissors, pick your poison thing is kind of coming out. Now, there are a lot of different gear sets that you can take, but again, you have to give something for something. So let me give you a point of reference here and show you a completely different build. So let's compare it to this build. This is an evasion build. Now, just so you know, I wouldn't really follow this build. I've just put this build together and stacked evasion for the purpose of this video so you guys can have a point of reference. This build specializes in evasion. So if we look at the evasion stats right here, you're going to notice 2,000 melee evasion, 1,800 ranged evasion, and 1,900 magic evasion. Now, just so you know, if you're running a dagger class, you're going to have an extra 700, 690 to be exact, 700 ranged and magic evasion. So if you add 700 magic and ranged evasion to this, you're at like 2,500 plus ranged and magic evasion. This is going to make you a lot tankier towards ranged classes. This would be a huge value in large scale PvP. And you've kind of got the bare minimum with melee evasion. The greatsword users, for example, that are at like 1,500 or less hit, you're going to be relatively strong against them. But the people that play for hit, stack hit, they're going to be able to ignore pretty much all of this evasion and hit you. Now, what are these defensives at the cost of? Well, number one, you're not taking Wraith. So what does that mean? That means your melee heavy attack chance is going to be lower. Even though this shows 415, I'm losing another 240 because I'm not in my Wraith set. And another thing I'm losing out on is attack speed. The difference between 33% attack speed versus 47% attack speed is significant. When I gap close on a target as a greatsword dagger, I am going to CC him and I'm going to try and blow him up. If it takes me long to actually do that, I can get interrupted, I can get peeled. Attack speed is really, really important. So this evasion build, what is it lacking? It's lacking damage in comparison to the first build. It's lacking a little bit of melee evasion. It's a little bit weaker to melee compared to the other build. And I'm certainly lacking attack speed, which is the big one. Now let's look at this other attack speed build right here. Again, another build that I wouldn't really pay too much attention to. I've created this build for the purpose of this video. Now this has gone 63%. Full sending at attack speed. I'm going to be lightning fast. I'm going to be super, super quick. But what is this at the cost of? Well, same thing. I'm kind of diminishing my 2 times proc with heavy attack a little bit by not going Wraith. And I'm losing a lot of hit with this build. This is a 1,400 hit build. Anyone that's running 2,000 melee evasion or higher, I'm just not going to be able to hit them. And of course, my defensives with this build is pretty decent, but bad against melee. Melee is going to lock me down. I have no melee evasion rather, but ranged evasion and magic evasion, not bad. So what would this build be potentially good towards? This build could be potentially good towards large scale PvP, where you're kind of taking a lot of heat and a lot of sustained damage from ranged and magic attacks, and you want to get in there, quickly burst and come out, because your job as a greatsword dagger would be to target and execute squishies anyways, and you can make a case saying that your attack and your damage is enough to execute, especially with this attack speed. Your damage will be enough to execute some of those squishies that you're targeting anyway, and you know, you're just in and out in that regard. So there is no right answer. There is no right or wrong answer. It's just very much a playstyle thing. Pick your poison. And I wanted to showcase this to you guys so you guys have a better understanding. There is no, these are completely different gear pieces, by the way. The item sets are completely different. 100%. And the traits are also completely different. So you can imagine if you choose a specific build and you decide to go a different direction, you kind of have to start completely over. And that would be very bad, especially if you're free to play. Even if you're pay to win, that would be really bad. Now, if you're wondering why I'm personally running this build, here's why. I'm running this build because my job as a greatsword dagger in the end game is to do two things. Number one, execute targets. And number two, set up big AoE bombs, since I've got double Tevent for my group. I want to deal a lot of damage. I want a lot of heavy attack. I have it. I need to be fast enough. I've got the attack speed here. My crit is enough. I've got 1400. And I want to hit targets. In the current KR endgame, a lot of people are running evasion, and having 2100 hit, which is a little bit more, I get another like 100 hit or so because it's actually with greatsword. As you can see, if I swap this, I actually have 2200 hit. Having this amount of hit will allow me to hit almost everyone, right? And this evasion right here, it's great that I have 2600 evasion. This makes me, I would say this build is probably close to BIS when it comes to arena, by the way. Large scale, you could certainly argue that there are definitely better options, but this is all around just a very good build. In large scale, this is very good. In arena, it's certainly at the top versus some of these other, but like if you're running a greatsword dagger build that doesn't have any melee evasion in the arena, it'll be a lot tougher considering how many greatswords are in the arena. So I wanted to make a build that would kind of allow me to do all content really well, and having enough melee evasion is a huge plus because it synergizes with Wraith. Wraith synergizes with melee evasion. The accessory options that you have give you melee evasion, which, by the way, I actually have two variations of this build. If I swap out my cloak here for a melee evasion, ranged evasion cloak, I actually bump up my melee and range evasion up like 100 to 200 points at the cost of a little bit of damage and a little bit of hit, which I would absolutely do in arena PvP. But in large scale PvP, I would rather have that extra hit, rather have that extra damage, because like something like melee evasion is having like 2600 melee evasion is more than enough for large scale. Ranged evasion, this is going to push me around like 2000 ranged evasion, which is going to give me roughly around anywhere from a 40 to 50% chance to dodge most range attacks. I think currently Bo is lacking a little bit when it comes to actual hit in the current KR endgame. So having 2000 is plenty enough for me to sustain in large scale, because my group in large scale organized PvP, I should have a healer. I have enough tankiness to sustain those attacks. And magic evasion, this is my weakness. You gotta pick a poison. I'm gonna get blown up to magic. I do have an active skill that I could use that will shield me from almost all magic attacks in a short window. I definitely live and die by that ability. That's part of the skill builds, which we're not going to talk about in this video, but this is hands down my weakness. Every class has a weakness. You just got to pick your poison. That's the way it goes. Now, the last thing I want to share with you guys in relation to my build are the attribute points. We didn't really talk about the attribute points here, but these attribute points are very important. Wraith gives me the correct attribute points. These accessories give me the correct attribute points because I want to hit 70 dex. When it comes to these stat points, the first thing you have to understand is when you reach a certain amount of, stat points, attributes. Let me be a little bit more consistent with my verbiage here. When it comes to the attribute points, when you hit a certain amount, so for example, if I have 30 points into dex, I will get 100 crit added to my character stat. Okay. If I get 40 dex, it unlocks the bonus damage plus 15. Now, these are really important because you can see when you get into the 60, 70 range, it's pretty significant. 70 gives me 120 evasion across the board. That's really good. 60 perception gives me 120 hit. That's a lot of hit. Strength at 50 is going to give me 50 heavy attack chance. Now, there are other things that these attribute points do. For example, 1 point of strength increases your max health by 15 or 20. I think it was 20, I believe. It increases your defenses. It also increases your attack by your base weapon damage by 1 versus Dex, which increases it by more. Dex and Wisdom increases it by more, which Dex also provides evasion. It provides attack speed. Perception provides you with hit for each attribute point that you put in. So all of this just pretty much ties into the bigger picture of what build are you running? How are you playing your class? What kind of greatsword dagger are you? What kind of bow dagger are you? What are you building for? What's your build's weakness? This is the reason why a lot of players actually don't give out their builds, because they don't want people knowing what they're weak against. With all that said, for me personally, all of this is the biggest appeal of Throne Liberty for me. You know, this is the reason why I enjoy playing ARPGs. I just love the fact that everyone's different. There's so many different options. NCSoft continually adds more and more items to shake things up, to give you more options. There are so many good items in the game, and I absolutely love that. I've spent so many hours in this quest log. I have so many different builds, so many different variations, and at the end of the day, knowledge is power, right? But if all of this is overwhelming to you, you don't have to know all this stuff. All you need to know is, hey, what is your build? Can I copy it? And what are you strong to? What are you weak to? How do I play your build? That's pretty much what you're going to ask. Now, I would highly recommend getting a build from someone that is credible. Okay, because I assure you, if you play with a bad build, or if you put a build together yourself without knowing anything, right? It's not just the items. You also have to know how classes and how weapon sets actually play, right? This is just the gearing element. You start gearing towards a specific playstyle, and understanding weapons and what they provide and their playstyles will help you and aid you in selecting the right build for you. Right? So just make sure you select a build from a credible source. I would highly recommend using Questlog if you want to mess around with some items. If you need some extra help, feel free to come follow me on Twitch. Ask me any questions you need. But as far as this video goes, thank you so much for watching, guys. I really appreciate it. Sorry if this was a little bit kind of convoluted and messy, and hopefully we can edit it to make it seem a little bit more structured and less ranty. Yeah, don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next video.